Hello and welcome to another episode of The Lion's Den. My name's Toby Bennett and I'm here from Black Crow Gaming to tell you how I got on at the Nottingham Super Major over the weekend. Just got back, so still quite fresh in the brain. Hopefully I'll remember all the details. But first of all, just want to say a massive thanks to UKTC and a massive thanks to my team for turning out in force. I believe there was about 18 crows there, so it was a really positive thing to see just so many players there and having fun and cheering each other on. So let's tell you a little bit more about the Nottingham Super Major to kick off. So as you can imagine, because Nottingham is the home of Warhammer, where Warhammer World is, 388 players attended the Nottingham Super Major. It's the first one of 2025 for UKTC, which does mean that it was the first tournament since both the Data Slate and the Grotmus detachments, which were legal, so there was a lot of star shatter, as you can imagine. Because of this, and because there is an international team tournament coming up soon, there was a lot of international team players, so a lot of Team England featured, a lot of Team Ireland and multiple other nations were there. So it was really nice to see that level of play there. Lots of really great players. And one thing I will say is I feel like it's a huge win for the Games Workshop rules team. They've released 30 new detachments or 25 new detachments, depending on how many it was for Grotmus. I think it was 25. And they were absolutely incredible. Not all of the detachments were incredible, but in terms of game balance, things are looking really, really positive at the moment. Yes, there's a few kinks to iron out, but I'm really pleased to see where the game is going at the moment. And luckily, I was able to say as much to a couple of the Games Workshop guys as well. So huge well done, guys. Loving your work and can't wait to keep going. Please don't nerf Deathwing Knights or I'll be very sad and start saying mean things about you. So let's jump straight into my list now, because we mentioned the Deathwing Knights. So I called it Dilf on Wheels because I'm hilarious, of course. And for some reason, I've just decided from my first ever 4-1, my list was called I Play Dark Angels because I think the lion is a Dilf. And Tactical Tortoise had to read that out on his stream. And because of that, every single name since has been something related to Dilfs. Because I think just in case I do well at a tournament, it's going to force some sort of poor influencer to have to read out the phrase Dilf and try and get through to their audience. So, without further ado, the list. Azrael. Why would you not include Azrael right now? He is absolutely incredible for what he does. For 115 points, he's giving you that extra CP, he's giving sustained hits to a squad, he's an absolute beast in combat, gives mortal wound protection and gives just normal protection because he gives a 4-up invulnerable save. Azrael is one of the best HQs in the game, I would say, for his points. Like, he is just absolute class, and if you're playing Dark Angels, he is one of our best units, if not our best unit. He is the first name on every Dark Angels list I've written that I've wanted to take to tournaments. So yeah, Azrael, incredible. But now we come on to the new stuff, which is the Ravenwing Command Squad. Now, the Ravenwing Command Squad didn't really change in the slate. The non-champion guys gained dev wounds on their weapons, which is kind of nice. They're fine, but they already had a plethora of rules. So they add an OC to the unit they're with. They resurrect a non-ATV model and non-character model a turn. So that is an Outrider, or if the Ancient has accidentally died, they always get to bring him back too. And then they also get to heroically intervene for free, add an inch to their to their advance roll, and add an inch to their charge roll. So they're actually pretty damn good. They've also got the plasma guns, and the plasma talons, I should say. And because they are 4 wounds apiece, you can kind of safely overcharge, where even if you fail one, it's not a huge disaster. So I've been really impressed with the Ravenwing Command Squad for 120 points, and I really got a nice run out with them, and they fit what I needed to fill, because they fit that role of the Lion was filling, in terms of being something that's just super aggressive, must answer, but also not totally essential if you lose it, because it's not a crazy amount of points. Obviously the Lion was 285 and the Ravenwing Command Squad are 280. Obviously the Lion is now more expensive and that's why he's gone, which is kind of a shame. Then I had some intercessors to sticky my backfield objective. And because they got a little bit of a glow up, they've got more shots now. Then I've got Assault Intercessors who will babysit Azrael till the cows come home. Being with Azrael just means they're really, really strong. They're a lot more durable. They're pretty damn cheap. And they just cut through things like there's no tomorrow. And they also enable Azrael to reroll wounds, which is really handy with his Dev Wound sword. Then we've got some Jump Pack Intercessors because they're just good. They can damage anything because they do mortal wounds on the charge. Because we are playing Stormlance and we're advancing and charging the whole time, they have a really dangerous threat range because they go 12 inches. They're good at scoring secondaries. They're good at skirmishing early in the game. There is just no kind of time that this unit is poor because they can always either do damage, do actions, or block your opponent in. So I really like the Jump Pack Intercessors. They're one of my favourite units. Then in a change that we made from the ITT, I went for 3 Ballistus Dreadnoughts, and that is because they have innate rerolls. Now, before I was playing Triple Predator Destructor, and I think they do still have the better damage output, but I switched to Ballistus Dreads because they have that innate reroll, which means that I can oath another target. And because they're just really durable. That difference between a 2-up and a 3-up has always been a huge thing in 10th edition because of how cover works. And the Ballistus is just extremely durable, really solid. And also it's 4 OC, which is not a bad thing. And weirdly enough, it can actually kick things to death in combat quite happily. So I've been quite impressed with the Ballistus Dreadnought, those couple of las cannons, and then the missiles as well, really performing well for me over the weekend, particularly with the fact that I can just sort of not have to worry about oathing what they're going to shoot. So yeah, Ballistus Dreadnoughts are 130 points. They're just incredibly well costed. Cost effective, I should say. Then, of course, we have 3x5 Deathwing Knights because why wouldn't you? I think 15 is the correct number for Deathwing Knights. They are just incredibly good. They're very durable. I think the big thing with Stormlance is that not only are they nice and quick because of the advance and charge, they can also quite happily bounce your opponent's charge, fall back, and then hit really hard. And because they have those anti-vehicle, anti-monster maces, they're never in a bad position for them to just do solid damage. So I've been really impressed with Deathwing Knights still, even at 250 points. For me, they are still an auto-include. They are expensive, and they are, you do have to be more careful with them, but they're still extremely good. Now on to another new and spicy unit. We had 6 Outriders. Now, of course, their rules changed from an auto advance of 6 inches to add a strength and a damage to their characteristics on the charge. Now, in an army that's basically always charging, that's pretty damn good. And the nice thing is it also, because the Ravenwing Command Squad joined that unit, it also applies to them, which means that Ravenwing Champion has a 3 damage sword, and those Black Knight close combat weapons go to 2 damage dev wounds. So that's really nice. But my big thing was when I first put this list together, it was actually a librarian with 6 Inner Circle companions taking that slot. And then I was just sort of sitting there going, 80 points for Outrider unit for 3, 90 points for Inner Circle companions. I think as much as they have -1 to hit, the T5 and the extra wound probably makes these guys, these Outriders, a little bit more durable. And they're also going 12 inches, so they're already pretty damn quick. And then that unlocks a whole bunch of extra strats that I have available to me. And then it became kind of a bit of a no-brainer. Obviously, we're trading off the 4-up invulnerable save, but that's just kind of much of a muchness. They're still super survivable. I was really, really impressed with the Outriders throughout the weekend. Their damage output is definitely equatable with Inner Circle companions because it's 4 attacks. Their damage is damage 2. Obviously, it's only -1 AP, which is less good against quite a few opponents, particularly things like Custodes. But a lot of the time, I don't think you care. So I'm still recovering from the tournament. I was really impressed with the Outriders, and just having that massive brick of bikes freed up the way that I could play because I could put all of the Deathwing Knights together, which allowed the Outriders to just sort of mess around on a flank on their own, either distracting my opponent, because for 280 points, I don't really care if I lose that unit, or just absolutely wreaking havoc, because they also unlock the Lance stratagem in Stormlance, which is really, really powerful. Obviously, if you've played the Gladius version, one of the biggest questions that I get is, do you miss the Lance Honor the Chapter? And yes, I really do sometimes. But between the anti-vehicle, anti-monster, and then the Outriders having access to that Lance stratagem, you miss it a lot less. So yeah, I was very impressed with Outriders. For 80 points, I think they're extremely efficient for what they do. And I think this brick is going to feature quite a lot. I'm wondering if maybe I switch it to 200 points and just have them with 3 Outriders and what that damage output looks like. Because it makes it a little bit easier to move, because obviously these guys can't go through walls. But that's for another day to test. Then next, a couple of scouts, because they're really good. And then I switched the 3rd scout unit to a unit of Reavers. Now, I can't say that this was exactly because Reavers are just better than scouts. Like, I think overall the 3rd scout unit would probably have been better. But the reason that I did it was because I wanted to test Reavers. I wanted to give them a chance. With a reactive move and the ability to reduce OC, they can really mess with your opponent's game plan. Because if they want to action, but then suddenly they're 0 OC, they cannot action. So Reavers were kind of fitting that 3rd scout role, where maybe I'd, infiltrate with 2 scouts and then play a little bit more cagey with the 3rd. So I was like, right, well, let's try with the Reavers instead, because they still scout 6. They still ultimately do all of those things that I need them to do in terms of blocking off walls and things like that. So I was really impressed with Reavers, but I don't think they're quite good enough to keep in the list. But I'll tell you later what I have replaced them with. But overall, Reavers did actually do quite well over the weekend. So I'm not overly upset about how they got on, and I think Reavers featured in quite a few Dark Angels lists. I know that Alan Percival, a teammate of mine, he's very high on them, but he does play them with the Lieutenant in Phobos armor, which makes perfect sense. Move, shoot, move is great. But he also deep strikes them, while as I always start everything on the board, because I like to just go, hey, here's my entire army. There's no tricks. It's just a massive hammer blow. So I really like that. So there's the list. Let's talk about how I got on in the games. So, round 1 is Terraform, which is do an action. If you survive to the end of your opponent's turn, you terraform that objective, and then you score 2 points on it for the rest of the game, and you score 4 points per objective you control. Home objective does count. Swift action, so battle line can advance and do actions, and I was up against Eldari. So my opponent had triple Fire Prism, which is quite nasty, the Avatar of Cain and the Farseer to make them go sort of a lot more durable, a lot more powerful. And then it was quite an interesting list, because he had like Corsairs that could scout, a couple of War Walkers, what else was there? Some Ranger bikes, some Rangers, then a couple of other scoring units. So just that Eldari goodness backed up by that really horrible shooting power. So going into this game, I thought that it looked like a decent matchup, because Eldari, with the points changes that they've had, simply just don't have a critical mass of units to actually put the chaff into the board now. They don't have things like Warp Spiders just all over the shop, where usually they would, like back when it was Eldari Winter, they would just kind of zoom about and deny primary, flame scoring units, all that kind of stuff. But now, obviously, because Warp Spiders are so expensive, they've kind of been priced out of doing that role. And that's where I thought that I could leverage my advantage, because I had the scouts that would trade very efficiently with his battle line units and his first line. And then that would force the bigger stuff to come out. And that would be when I could commit and look to kill off things like the Avatar of Cain, or force the Fire Prisms to expose themselves and get nailed by las cannons. So it actually went a little bit different to that. I went second, and I started with my brick of bikes behind my big L. I started all of my Deathwing Knights in the centre behind the two small buildings that make an L, and then I started with just a couple of other units behind my battle line, my JPIs, that kind of stuff, behind the medium L, with some ballistas just sort of scattered around the board, so that I could do some shooting wherever those fire prisms decided to turn out. Now, there was a fire prism in each third of the board. So there was one behind his medium, one behind his two Ls, and one behind his big L. The avatar was in the center as well. And then there was just sort of lots of units just sort of dotted around. And the rangers were sort of on my expansion objective. So he was clearly looking to try and deny me my expansion objective early. So I went, okay, well, we'll put the scouts on your expansion objective. We'll put the Reavers in the center, and we'll also put my scouts ready to charge your rangers, because if I go first, I'm going to be super aggressive. Now, the Eldari went first, and I thought, okay, perfect. Going second on Terraform is not ideal, but I think in this particular matchup it was good because it forced him to come towards me. It forced him to not really be able to do anything turn one. And I think that really benefited me because he just had no shots. I didn't have to trade anything. The scouts sort of scouted away so they could hide. And there wasn't any high pressure that could come and do damage to me. The major sort of like pressure move was a unit of... the Corsairs, or whatever they're called, the Void Reavers. They ran out and they tried to jail me behind my two small L's. And I just went, okay, well, I'm going to throw some Reavers forward. They're going to shoot and kill that unit with the support of a Ballistas. And then those Reavers are going to charge those Wind Riders behind there. And I'm going to get full on... overwhelming force, which I drew turn one just from one unit of Reavers. So as I say, Reavers did well. Like the fact that I'm thinking about dropping them, they still did extremely well. I was very impressed with them. So that was a really great start that those Reavers were able to just deal with all of that. And then I had my JPIs just push forward, go for the throat against the Rangers, and also go for the scout bikes behind them. So they were able to do a good number of mortal wounds into both of those units. Actually, I think they did no mortal wounds into the Rangers, but then they just chopped them up. And then the Power Fist sort of punched some of the Ranger bikes, leaving one Ranger and one Ranger bike alive. So that was a really good exchange for me. And then that forced my opponent to commit with his commit with most of his army just to dislodge a unit of JPIs. But the big thing about turn one was that, you know how I put those bikes in the BL? Turns out they can auto advance 9 inches. So they also advanced 9 inches. And they went, zoom up the board, add 1 to my charge. Oh, look, I'm in your deployment zone. I'm in combat with a fire prism. I guess I'll lance it. So my bikes managed to pick up a fire prism turn one that was in my opponent's deployment zone. And from there, I kind of felt this game is nearly over. I just need to kill that avatar. The avatar was forced to commit because of the JPIs, which is a crazy thing to say. Like, JPI should not force an avatar to commit, but like my opponent had no real choice. That is the weakness with Eldari right now. There was no unit that could dislodge them efficiently apart from the avatar. And at which point, out came the Deathwing Knights, out came Azrael, and they just chopped the avatar to pieces. In fact, one of the Deathwing Knight units just went absolutely crazy and ended up killing the avatar before he got the chance to interrupt, which I was not expecting. But yeah, like sometimes Deathwing Knights just spike. Between that, like grenades, avatars are not as durable, I think, as Eldari players would hope they are, even with the -1 to wound. In this case, he did actually fail the -1 to wound, but it wouldn't have mattered a crazy amount because there were maces coming at him with anti-monster 4-up. So with the avatar going down at that point, it was kind of more of a cleanup operation and focusing on point scoring. So I was able to terraform kind of every objective. And then I could, if it was teams, I could have been a lot crueler in terms of points denial, but in singles, I don't like to do that personally. Like, if I've had a really enjoyable game against someone and the game was extremely enjoyable, I will always try and support my opponent in scoring as many points as possible, whether they're winning or losing. So that game ended at 100-48 in the Dark Angels' favour. So really positive start to the day. But equally, you kind of crap yourself when that happens, because you're like, what on earth am I going to go into round two with so many great players in the room? So that jumps us in to round two. Now we're playing Purge the Foe, Smoke and Mirrors versus World Eaters. Now, my opponent Aaron was not new to combat armies, because he'd come second in the UK for Custodes the year before. So very talented player, also just a really lovely guy. And we were playing Purge, Smoke and Mirrors, and as I say, I was against World Eaters. And it felt almost like a bit of a gentleman's agreement that we were both going to deploy really aggressively, run at each other, and see what happened. And honestly, it was one of my favourite games of the day. We literally did exactly that. So turn one, Aaron went first and connected most of his charges. So Angron got into some Deathwing Knights. I lost 2 units of scouts, my Reavers, my JPIs. My JPIs were back in that far top left-hand corner as well. And I lost 3 of the 5 Deathwing Knights in the squad that Angron charged, but I was able to reactive move my bikes away from getting charged by a blob of 6 Exalted 8-bound, which was really good, because otherwise that could have got quite worrying quite quickly. So after that sort of like slaughter, I was like, okay, how do I respond to this? Well, in that turn one, in my crackback with the Deathwing Knights, the 2 guys did 10 damage to Angron. Yeah. Just failed all of his 4-ups. It was absolutely crazy. So Angron's left on 6 wounds. I'm like, brilliant. Okay. At this point, there's no defensive buffs for the World Eaters, because they had to go advance and charge and +2 move so that they could actually get into my lines. And now it's my turn to go as hard as possible. So I was able to pick up 9 Exalted 8-bound. I was able to pick up Angron. I was able to pick up, I think, another 2 8-bound from one squad and another couple elsewhere. So a lot of the army was just dead. And at that point I went, okay, now I just push. We just crack into each other, and that will be that. But because so many of my scoring units were dead, it was actually really difficult to score points, because I basically lost my entire screen, which is all my scoring units turn one, which was a bit crazy. But that game ended at 82-55. So really fun game. There's not so much to say in terms of like tactical finesse, apart from there was one good reactive move. It was very much and then Angron didn't come back. So good news for me, because there was a couple of times I was like, if Angron comes back, I could be in real trouble. But luckily for me, he didn't. And the Deathwing Knights were able to just sort of keep carrying the day, push on the last Exalted 8-bound, take that centre. And that was the game. So going into 3-0, well, going into round 3 undefeated is somewhat terrifying, because usually that means there's about to be a shark in front of you. And that did happen. So I went into Clement Tornade, who is one of the best players in the UK, on Take and Hold with Hidden Supplies versus his Space Wolves. Now, Space Wolves are a very good counter to Dark Angels, because they just have such a high number of attacks that eventually they just pull those Deathwing Knights down. So Space Wolves is not a good matchup, but equally Clement was quite worried about this matchup too. He didn't like the fact that I had the 15 Deathwing Knights, so that made me feel a little bit better. And luckily, because I had the opportunity to play Paul James's Space Wolves in a previous tournament, I kind of knew what I was in for, had an idea of how I could counter him, and even though it was like the anti-Dark Angels style, I don't think Clement was quite leaning into it being anti-Dark Angels, which was super beneficial for me. And there was no Logan Grimnar, so there wasn't just that threat that I was going to get advanced charged and reroll everything in a Space Wolf War turn. So that was quite helpful. But my God, 20 Wolfen are quite scary. And well, essentially what I did was I put all of my Deathwing Knights in the centre again. I put my bikes on the far left-hand flank so that they could go up the left and sort of push there. And then I put some token units to defend on the right flank so that I could push up and sort of, if I needed to, push some Deathwing Knights that way too. Now, most of Clement's army crashed through the centre. So as I say, 20 Wolfen, Bjorn, Ragnar, all that kind of Space Wolfy goodness. A Vanguard, 10 Vanguard vets with with Smash Captain, and all with sustained hits is pretty damn nasty in combat. But on Clement's turn 2, and he went first, he failed a 4-inch rerollable charge with some Wolfen. So really unlucky there. And what that meant was that one of my ballistas was then not engaged in combat, and also I got to dictate where we were then going to have those fights. I was able to push forward. I was able to pop his Rhino that had Ulrich and his 10 Blood Claws in. And because I popped the Rhino, I was then able to get my Deathwing Knights into his very squishy Tactical Marines, which is really positive for Deathwing Knights. They just go through power armor like there's no tomorrow. And because that happened, that was where the game kind of fell down for Clement. But equally, he still really made me work for it. And actually, I played, I think because I wasn't expecting to do as well. So I kind of took my foot off the gas a little bit towards the end because I was like, oh my goodness, I've got this, I've won. And I gave away more points than I should. And I gave Clement more points than I could have denied him. Which was a bit of a frustration personally, especially when we're thinking about teams in the near future. And we chatted about it after the game, and he gave me some really good tips in terms of how to kind of prevent that going forward, but also kind of comforted me in that most Space Marine versus Space Marines in teams, you're looking at an 11-9 or a 12-8. So the fact that this was a 13-7, I think, was still a positive. It ended 87-69. Really good game. Clement is an absolute pleasure to play. Real gentleman. Had horrendous luck at the start. Really, really horrendous luck. And the fact that he was going first on this mission is really tough because usually if your opponent goes second on this mission, you have to be so aggressive because they are going to score 15 at the end. There is just basically no way to stop your opponent from scoring 15 in turn 5. But yeah, it's a really difficult one to go first on. So Clement was super aggressive, killed lots of my screening units, much like the World Eaters. But again, Deathwing Knights just so consistent, and that reactive move so powerful. The bikes, I think, did survive quite well. But eventually they did get dragged down by those Vanguard vets. But I was really impressed with them still, again, just in terms of being cheap and useful. So yeah, 3-0 at the end of day 1. Riding real high, quite nervous going into day 2 because there were so many high quality players undefeated. And I sat in the pub waiting for my pairing and saw that I had orcs. Now, orcs are terrifying. I think the phrase tuck fankbusters should be said as often as possible because bomb squigs are stupid and I hate them and they stink. So there was four of the bomb squig units, 2 breakers and 2 tank busters. I was up against a really, really cool list. And it was up against a chap, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here, but it was up against Luis, who was all the way from Spain, and an absolutely brilliant guy. Some of the guys had come down from Barcelona to come and see some of the 6++ guys, so big shout out to both of them. We had a really nice time. It was great to get to know him and kind of understand more about the Spanish Warhammer scene as well. I really, really enjoyed it, and it was nice just to chat. But we were playing on Burden of Trust with prepared positions versus orcs. Oh, God. So it was Warhorde orcs. And this was a weird one. Like a really, really weird one. Because essentially I went first, which is not ideal. because scoring primary is already hard enough, and you've really got to go for it on this one if you go first. So I tried to jail him, basically around the entire board turn 1 with scouts and reavers. And it worked, which was really, really good, really positive. But he broke out pretty swiftly afterwards. And when I went to kill his kill rig or whatever it's called, so I got purge the not purge the foe, bring it down turn 2, and I was like, there's a kill rig and a battle wagon there. That's a potential for 8 points on secondaries. That could be really good. So I go for it. Get 1 unit of Deathwing Knights into the battle wagon. Another unit of Deathwing Knights into the battle wagon, and the bikes into the battle wagon, and then another one into kill rig. Sorry, I got that slightly mixed up. And then I was able to go, okay, let's hit real hard. And the kill rig goes down, and he rolls a 6 on the explosion. So he gets to careen and goes right into my lines. So I'm forced to pop a bunch of watchers. My Dreadnought is suddenly down on half wounds, and then a Beast Snagger boss and Beast Snaggers just jump out on the center objective, essentially just breaking my jail cordon, because then he has a battle line in the center, able to hunt down a Dreadnought very quickly. So that was really, really rough. But the defining moment of this match is right in that top left-hand corner. I was able to get those Deathwing Knights and those bikes in a massive blob around the battle wagon, which essentially would mean that he wouldn't be able to disembark without doing the desperate breakout or desperate escape, whatever it's called, where he takes mortals on 1s, 2s, and 3s. And I was like, there's like 500 points in there. If I manage to bring some of that down before it gets into my lines, that could be really positive. And also that's going to mean that if that battle wagon survives, then he can't get it out. The Deathwing Knights left it on 1 wound, so I was like, cool, okay, it's going to die. He'll have to desperate escape. There'll be stuff in my lines, but like, the bikes did no damage. Absolutely none. I rolled terribly. And it was generally like, okay, that's left on 1 wound. What's the rules around this now? And essentially what had to happen is the battle wagon had to then retreat in the war turn. And the war turn was brutal because like I got hit by 6 bomb squigs in one go, because bomb squigs are stupid and I hate them so much. But I lost my right flank, which was being held down by Azrael, so I lost my source of CP gen as well. I lost a lot of Deathwing Knights. I lost a lot more Deathwing Knights than I expected. But the 5 Mega Knobs and boss in Mega Armor and another unit of Breaker Boys were unable to get out and do all of the WAR stuff. So that was hugely impactful. Because then suddenly we're fighting back behind Luis's small L's. That allowed me to really push him hard and keep trying to sort of go for the throat and keep him jailed. Now, unfortunately, he was able to pivot and get out of there. Storm Boys being able to advance and charge when they've got that 12-inch move is absolutely disgusting. They're a brilliant unit. Really, really powerful. Very, very impressive overall. And they actually sort of went from that bottom right-hand corner all the way to the top left-hand corner in 2 turns, just going through my units. So that was very impressive. But I did manage to just about eke out the win. It was only a 61-40, and that was because we finished in battle round 4 rather than battle round 5, which is a bit of a shame. But it is what it is. We should have been on the clock a little bit better. So like, hands up on that. I don't think either of us really wanted to play on a clock. And like in hindsight, yeah, we absolutely should have, because it would have been great to see that game go to absolute fruition. But yeah, that was the end of the game. And it was a really fun one. It was really, really back and forth. I was just sort of going, is he going to be able to catch up? Like, I've got this lead. I don't think he can, but he might be able to. And it was very, very tight towards the end. So a narrow win. And we're going into the next round at 4-0. And I'm looking at all of the other 4-0s and going, oh my goodness, what madness am I going to go into? There is people like Inez Wilson on his Blood Angels list. There's David Gaylord, Naz on their horrible Bridgehead lists. There's so many different nasty lists that I could go into. And I get my round pairing and I'm like, okay, what horribleness am I going to get? And I got Custodes and I was like, hang on a second. That's a decent matchup. That's something that I want. Because Custodes, I mean, it was triple Warden, which is nasty, especially for an army that focuses on the combat phase. However, I still have play into that. I still have some shooting. Shooting that can consistently pick up 3-wound models. And I have some really nasty tricks in combat just to survive, namely -1 damage. Shock horror, that, right? So I was like, okay, let's go for it. And I go first against Ben Archer. We both kind of went, I don't know how we're both here, but like we love it. Let's have a good time. I think Ben was a little bit exhausted after his last game because there had been some difficulty in terms of like communicating how certain things were working, which had been a bit of a mental drain to him. And they'd had to end up getting a TO over to watch for a little bit just to make sure that everything was going as well as possible. But then I just sort of went to Ben and I was like, right, we're going to play this, fun first. I know we're going for 5-0, but fun first. Which doesn't mean play any less competitively, because my God, did we knock 7 shades of shit out of each other. But we just made sure that we were sort of talking really clearly, playing on a clock this time, and communicated exactly what was going on and how we were doing things, agreed it before all of the moves were made, that kind of stuff. So really nice way to sort of round out the tournament, just to make sure there's no feels bads whatsoever. And I went first, which is real bad on Scorched Earth. You don't want to go first, because usually it means that your opponent's going to beat you on primary by absolutely smashing you in their final turn. So I go, okay, I have more units. I'm going to go super aggressive. I'm just going to go for the throat and see what happens. And I actually managed to charge his home objective turn 1, which was quite funny. The scouts just sort of went, meh, let's go. And because there was nothing in that top center, I was able to scout very close to his deployment zone, and advance charge with those scouts into the deployment zone and leave one sister alive. That was very, very frustrating, because I'd also been heroically intervened by some custodian guard who promptly then slaughtered my poor scouts. But then I was able to jail on the other flank, just sort of block in his rhino, which was kind of useful. Not overly, but, oh well. But because I'd acted so aggressively, that kind of forced Ben to act really aggressively back. He was like, cool, we're going to go for each other real hard. So that's exactly what he did. He pushed up towards my bikes and 10 Deathwing Knights with one of his Warden bricks, had Trajan and his Warden brick in the center, and then sort of went for he was planning on going for a 6-inch charge into my bikes to take as many of them down and sort of change where the conflict was going to be, at which point I reactive moved. And that just sort of let me go straight back, and I went, don't forget my reactive move. But reactive move it's just always there. Like, even when you know it's there, you're like, yeah, okay, I don't want to have a 9-inch charge, so might as well proc it. And that allowed my bikes to sort of get back, prevent that charge from happening, because then he couldn't declare the advance and charge to try and just roll an 11. And then that sort of handed the initiative back to me. At which point, I crash in with the bikes, crash in with the Deathwing Knights, and even through that 4-up feel no pain, I was able to take down the Blade Champion and his Wardens. Then the bikes had a bit of a rough end to the tournament. They got absolutely cut to pieces by a tank and some of the flyboys. Can't remember what they're called. The custodian flyboys that get to free rapid ingress, which is real nasty. But that's what they got to do, and they just absolutely popped off and slaughtered them. But again, Deathwing Knights, really, really tough for Custodians to deal with. So eventually the Deathwing Knights just managed to grind out that win. It was a real slog, and there was very few models alive at the end. And then we just kind of, we got to the point where we were like, cool, we can just kind of chat about this a little bit more. We know what's happened. We've had a really good time. Let's just call it because we're both quite tired. So it finished 78-71. And holy shit, I 5-0'd. Like, I was not expecting that. Quite literally, as you can see, I've given it a little note there. Holy shit, I went 5-0 and won Best Marine. Like, mad. I honestly, I actually got a little bit emotional when my name got called out, because I didn't expect to win anything. Like, I was really shocked. Like, as much as I've managed to achieve some really great things, and I'm trying to be like more positive about achieving those things, and sort of realizing that I can be proud of myself for that stuff, it still felt very surreal, that I had so many incredible players around me, so many players that I think are 10 times better than me, and I've managed to sort of stand up with them. So it was a real surreal moment, and sort of very affirming, that I'm on the right path, and that this is really a space that I love. And I think, to be honest, the big thing for me was that there was a massive cheer when I got the win for Best in Faction. And that just to see the community kind of like react in such a positive way, that made everything for me. And having some messages off of people that I massively respect, absolutely love to pieces, that's been great. And all because of Toy Soldiers, who'd have thought, right? So yeah, scoring, I would say, let's talk about the bad stuff, because I've sort of sucked my own dick enough. I came 12th. It was the bottom of the 5-0s, and that is because my scoring was absolutely poo. I don't think that's a problem with the list. I think that was just the armies that I played. They were super aggressive, mostly combat lists. You can see what happened in that Eldari game where I was against a shooting list. I got the 100, but then when it's those super aggressive lists like Orcs, World Eaters, Space Wolves, like it was just, they were always going to, I had to focus on killing them, and I had to sacrifice my scoring pieces. So that's why I think the score was lower than it would usually be in a tournament for me. But like, maybe that's the new meta, and like maybe I need to adapt in some ways to that. But yeah, like, I'm still really pleased. I think Dark Angels are in an incredible spot. Like, as Dark Angels players, we should all be very, very excited. I think our army, it's solid into this meta. It's got loads of play. There was multiple other Dark Angels Stormlance lists. There was a Dark Angels Gladius list as well that did well. It was really positive. And I think just a really great outing for Dark Angels in general. And I'm excited to see what we now change up. There's only one change I would make to my list at the moment, and that is switching out the Reavers for Incursors. And that is because they get their own Bombsquig, and Bombsquigs are bullshit. No, it is kind of a Bombsquig. It's 3 inches instead of 12, but it's still all right. And the fact that they've got Assault on their guns is really quite handy, and giving +1 to hit in the early game to those Ballista Treads, just to sort of make sure that they kill off what they're going to kill, because then they're hitting on 2s and re-rolling. That's going to be really good, just to make sure I get rid of those problematic targets early. So that's the switch. Bit of mortal wound output. And also, you only lose 1 attack per guy, and they get sustained hits instead. So I don't really see a huge downside. I think they're really good, because suddenly they're also shooting, instead of like just advanced charging. They're advanced shooting and charging, and sometimes popping off mortals. So yeah, really, really excited to get that tested. My next tournament is the ITT, so that should be really good. I will be on Dark Angels again, I think, depending on what the team need. But yeah, I got to say a massive thank you to my team, to our sponsors, Glasshammer Gaming and Terrain Forge, and for you guys, because I love making this content. It's great fun. I love making it for you. I hope you enjoy it as well. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to everyone that came up to me over the weekend and was celebrating with me. it's crazy the kind of community that Toy Soldiers creates. And I would say if you're thinking of going to competitive, do it, because I've met really all of my best friends through playing competitive Toy Soldiers, which is probably quite a weird comment to make, but like it's goddamn true. So yeah, much love to everyone that's watching. Thank you so much. Leave your feedback in the comments. Give us a like. Give us a subscribe if you want to see more. I have some other series that I do on here as well, to do with Codex Marines and Chaos Space Marines if you like that. So they're quite good fun as well. Give them a check out. Share them with mates that also play those armies. But for now, I'm gonna head off and continue to be like somewhat emotional about about things going really well and like having so many wonderful friends. Mostly that second bit. So stay loyal, fuckers, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.